Unspeakable evil walks amongst us. Here's your look at the QMX. This is the Conjuring Universe, the Nun 1/6 scale articulated figure. Warner Brothers' The Conjuring Universe springs from the terrifying true stories of the demonologists Lorraine and Ed Warren. In The Conjuring, they face the malevolent spirit of a murdered witch, and in The Conjuring 2, Lorraine has a horrifying vision of a demon, Valak, that takes the form of a nun. Now, in the movie prequel, The Nun, that demon stalks the Holy Sisters of a Covenant in Romania. It's an ancient site that holds a dark secret and a portal to hell. This collectible figure has over 36 points of articulation and features two different heads. One with her scary "I'm going to get you" stare, and the other head in attack mode with her wide open mouth revealing terrifying fangs. Multiple hands and Ed Warren's haunting portrait of her from The Conjuring 2 are included, as well as a logo base. Now, before we go ahead and join the convent, certainly hope it's not going to come to that, the first thing we're going to do before we get a good gander at the nun is to figure out how tall the figure stands. For that, I'm using my trusty tape measure here. We're going to stop it right to the very top of her veil. Looking at the trusty tape measure of mine, I can read this off to you, members of the mob, that the figure of the Nun Valak stands 10.5 inches in height. And in centimeters, that works out to be 26.8, a little over 26.5 centimeters tall. Looking at the figure's display stand, it's a simple circular base that has the nun across the top. I think for QMX releases, minus of course the Star Trek releases that would have had its own unique sign to it, the Wesley from Princess Bride also, I feel, shares this same circular base. Of course, for Wesley's case, it wasn't showing the nun across the top, but in this case for Valak, it certainly is. All done in white with that trademark N going backwards. I like the way that they've done that. You know, I don't know if it's just me, but the plastic feels quite heavy for the display stand. I mean, when you look at it, you would just imagine, well, you kind of know how heavy 6 scale stands usually go. And this one feels like it's got some weight to it, even though it's just simply plastic. On the underside, we've got the nun and all related characters and elements are trademark of the WBEI, and then you got the Nun Valak with QMX Master Series articulated figures down below that. If you want to check out more from the folks over at QMX, most definitely head on over to www.qmxonline.com. Running down the list of accessories that come included with the nun, you do get yourself the Ed Warren painting of Valak. Done very nicely, I must admit. The surface of it actually does look like canvas, right to the fact that if you flip it around to the back, it does actually look like it's a real material stretched across the frame. The frames normally would have been done in all wood. Here instead they've mimicked that in plastic. But at least, if you look at it, it's got a grain to it that it looks like it could be made out of wood, even though it technically isn't. It's a really effective looking painting. Unfortunately for me, I've got one little imperfection on the side. I can't tell whether it's been something that's come off of the printing or if simply it's just been paint that's splotched on the side. Luckily, it's small enough that you barely even notice it. I wonder if it actually came off of Valak's hands. Let's just talk about the hands here for a second. She does come with some swappable hands. It so happens, actually, now that I think about it, I've got the hands still in place. Maybe it might have actually been the bit of the paint off the hands. I really hope that that's not the case, as I really haven't done this too often already. The hands just simply attached to the sides. A couple of different ways that you can go about it. I got a couple of gripping hands right now in the sockets of her forearms, but you also do have these hands as well that just sort of clamp to the side of the painting. It just holds it in place like that. But I wonder, though, if maybe that's what's left that little bit of leftover. If I just take that off for a second, I really hope it's not a case where the paint's coming off of the fingers. I mean, it would prevent me really from wanting to do this too often, or at the very least settle on which hands I want to display her with, and then just display her with the painting. Now there's this option if you want to go with more of the flat full fingers showing on either side, or what I was already doing with this particular figure, I had these gripping hands, which these hands actually only serve more so to hold the side of the painting. Let me just move this just there for a second, and this just kind of clamps onto the sides. It works the same way, although again, I'm just a little bit more worrisome about the idea of that paint kind of being left in the process. And again, you can display it that way. The thing about this particular figure is I've noticed already that the hands, this one arm has become loose. I don't know why. This one arm's not so much the issue, but this arm has already gotten loose. And I really have not had this out of the packaging for very long at all. So there's a couple of different ways, again, that you can display it. You want to, again, clamp it onto the side. You can hold it like this. Or if, again, you want to go with these hands show more longer fingers stretched across the canvas. Again, there's a couple of different ways and different roads that you can go on. I suppose while we're also on the topic of hands, we'll look at the rest of the hands that come included with Valak. I'm so always compelled to say she. Technically, Valak is a male demon, but simply because he's taking the form of a female nun, I always tend to go more she, he. He does come included with a pair of, like I said, several different pairs of interchangeable hands. We already looked at these hands. We don't want to spend any more time on it than we have to. These are the alternate hands that if you want to have displayed holding the painting. Valak also comes with a pair of relaxed hands, kind of like jazz hands. The hands are completely flat, as you can see. Kind of just, again, if you want to have the hands straight out. They are in a slightly, like, off-putting angle, though. Like, they're really bent far back. But it gives you a good opportunity at least to see the detail that QMX put into each of the individual hands and the fingers attached to them. And then if you want more of the scaring hands, certainly in the market of those, you can display Valak with those hands as well. I kind of like these. I think I'm going to go with these as my probably preferred route to go, certainly if I'm not going to be displaying Valak with the painting in his hands. Of course, no nun would be complete without a cross, and Valak does come included with a cross as well. It looks like it's been just done in a chrome plastic. There's no metal actually coming into play here, and it's been roped with a black cording. The downside, though, is unfortunately you can see where the knot's been tied to the top, but if you hide it, of course, behind the neck of Valak, you're not even going to see it. To attach this around the neck, you could fit it around the head. That's not really going to work because the veil is in place. You're literally going to have to decapitate Valak. So if you just remove it, grab the head here, and where they've actually hidden the articulation point, I mean, you sort of see it because there's a seam line right here, but you're actually going to have to remove the fitting coif from the wimple. I'm not making that up. This is the coif, this is the wimple. You're just going to remove that from the habit. Look at me dropping all these words. And then you're going to just simply put the cross over top of the neck. Hide that knot, of course, on the back so nobody's going to see it. Make sure it's all nice and flat. And then you're going to go ahead and just place the head back in place. Here's what the socket looks like on the inside. And that's just going to fit over pop. Just watch this cording. It ties off to the back of the wimple, so you want to make sure that's the coif. All these nun terms. And that just fits over top like that. One real problem I'm having with this particular figure, before we even start digesting anything to it, is the black veil. Why don't we just talk about that right now? The veil is only attached by this. Just one small seam that's sewn in place. Even if that was a correct way that nuns have it, it has very little attachment to actually the head sculpt. So a lot of times you'll just find yourself readjusting the veil. I guess they've done it in a way so that there is a little bit more that you can pose to the front of the veil, because this whole section right here is wire framed. It's got a wire frame along the top, running down the front section here, and right off to the tip. The back area of the veil, let me just spin it around, doesn't have any bit of adjustability to it. The bottom half does. This part right here, there's a line, there's a wire right around along the bottom area here, but the rest of it isn't. It's only along the front area here. But again, I don't know why. Maybe it's just so that they could showcase that yes, in fact, they did stitch the underveil to the head sculpt. So it does show like there's a little bit of craftsmanship at play. But boy, oh boy, this veil is just a pain in the butt. It's flopping around a little bit too frequently. I mean, at the very least, I would have actually just attached it like right there. Just even, I don't even want to use the term glue, because glue seems so, I don't know, it just doesn't seem the most polished, of course, but if they had even just sewn it right there, I mean, you could still do enough with the veil, but just the way it is right now, it moves around way too frequently that I'm just so compelled to put something on the back there so it keeps it at least in place. But there is the cross, nonetheless, there on the front. The figure also does have an alternate head sculpt, which we can look at right now. We'll just pick that up. And it basically is the alternate head portrait with this screaming nun face. again, you're still going to have the same problems with this veil. It's barely attached. If you're not even careful, I'm no doubt worrying that the veil's going to come right off one of these days. But if you want to swap the head out here for a second, we'll just pop this right off so I can show you how it works. It basically will work the exact same way. And you just attach this in place. Making sure, of course, there we go. The coif fits over top like that and plugs into place. And then from there you can just adjust the veil. Maybe they did do it loose enough that you can then readjust the veil accordingly once you've got the figure's head sculpt in place. Still, I feel like there's enough you can do with it by even still attaching it further down. I mean, it certainly would prevent this from moving and flopping around too much. I mean, look at that. There is literally one thing that's attaching the whole back veil here to the actual top, the white under veil. And I really think they could have fixed this a little bit better than what they actually did. Here's a close-up look at what the two head sculpts look like. This is the defaulted head sculpt when you get it out of the packaging. This is the swappable, swapped-out head sculpt for the Screaming Valak. The eyes are probably the one thing that stays the same with the two pieces, although the Screaming head portrait, I feel, has a more dark shadowing that's happening around the eye sockets, where it's a little bit lighter on the defaulted. The noses are also something that seems very similar to one another, maybe a little bit more detailing done to the side of the bridge for the Screaming sculpt. And of course the mouths couldn't be any bit more different from one another. The Screaming portrait now sports a pair of fangs, both upper and lower fangs, and there's also, looks like there's a semi-clear coat that's been added over top of it, just so it's got a little bit more of a sheen. You can see there on the tongue as well. I also do notice, though, when it comes to the head sculpts, if you look at the veins that are coming across the forehead and out from the eyes and around the mouth, they're a little bit more fainter and subtler on the defaulted head sculpt versus the Screaming head sculpt, which I think stand out a little bit more. They're darker in nature. The pattern work is also a little bit different from one another too. They're not quite carbon copies to one another. I think, again, when it's all said and done, I would prefer going the route this head sculpt here when it comes to displaying Valak for myself. But I do like the fact that at least QMX gives you two head sculpts to work with. So if you are in the market more to display your Valak with the Screaming head sculpt, you can most definitely do that instead. Going back to this head sculpt simply just because I like this head sculpt a little bit more, let's look at the rest of the nun's outfit. Now, the habit that she wears, or he wears, of course, in the film is standard issued nun habits. I don't think there's anyone specifically differencing than one that the demon here wears versus your regular traditional nuns. You've got the black veil, which is still a bit of an issue for me. I mean, look, it's barely, I know I sound like a broken record, but it's barely attached. I'm going to have to see if I can find a different way to attach. I mean, even if they put something here, like a little bit of Velcro, where you could just attach, I mean, because this part wouldn't have to, this part, while it could still move around, if they just put like a little bit of Velcro right here on the back of the wimple, then you could simply just add the veil to that and then wouldn't go anywhere. Then you wouldn't have any issues whatsoever. But for regular habit attire, you've got your black veil, you've got your white underveil, form-fitting coif, which is this part right here, and then you've got yourself a wimple. You're very knowledgeable, humbled reviewer. Well, I did spend some time in the convent back in the day. We'll talk about that another time, I'm sure. Of course, you've got the cross that I've already put around the neck, and you've got yourself the tunic dress. If I flip the front flap up, it's a lot of Fs. Underneath that, you've got a faux leather brown belt, which has been seamed nicely. You've got stitching on either end of it, and wrapped its way around, tied almost in a partial knot, and the rest of excess is hanging down the end, or hanging down the front here. This goes all the way down to, of course, the bottom of the dress. If you flip this up, probably not something that most nuns would do. Just going to flip this up for a second. You can see underneath that Valak, despite being a demon, still feels the need to wear knee-high black socks. And then you also have a pair of very shiny nun shoes as well. I don't know if it's just me, but the shoes seem very thick and chunky. They're not very thin shoes. I guess maybe Valak has really fat feet. I don't really know. It is attached by ball joints. I mean, you can really see a marginal difference where the feet are, the shoes, and then where the start of the leg actually is. There's a big gap in the middle. This is, of course, going to be concealed by having the tunic dress fitting over top of it, but I simply just did this so that you guys can see what it actually looks like, what it looks like underneath a dress of a nun, or a habit of a nun. I wouldn't recommend that you actually do that, because I'm thinking that's pretty sacrilegious, and I don't think the guy upstairs is going to be all that happy that you're lifting up a dress of a nun, but we'll do it certainly in this review, and that's what the undersides of the soles look like. Again, I feel like the shoes are very chunky, very thick, very full-sized shoes, and I can't imagine how her toes would be very long either. These are small little things that after all won't make any bit of a difference, because after all, the tunic is just going to hang over most of it anyways. You're really only going to see the front of the shoes anyways. Looking at Valak's articulation, because it's attached the way that it is, you still get a full range of motion where you can move the head back and forth, up and down. Before actually having this physically in hand, I thought the wimple was going to be attached to the veil, where you took the head off, all of this would be coming off as well. And it's smart, at least on QMX's part, that they kept this as a separate piece. Not only it makes things a lot easier when it comes to putting the cross on, but it certainly makes a lot of more ease, at least for you, the collector, when it comes to the articulation of the figure. You can still get a full range of motion on the head. I won't talk any more about that than I have to. The veil does have, as I'd already mentioned, a little bit of a wire frame. It starts here and it works all the way down on both sides. So if you are somebody, I think when it comes to probably displaying Valak, I'm going to try to keep the veil a little bit more closer to his head. Just going to bend it down on both sides. The upper torso appears to be on a ball joint and has a little bit of waist swivel as well. I have noticed though, I'm just flipping this up just for a second again, the torso body feels like it's rubber, like it's all soft here. And it's even soft actually on the behind as well, this whole section right here. I mean, short of me actually lifting this up, which I guess I'm kind of doing that right now, this whole bottom section is, like I said, just the legs are plastic, the arms are plastic, but like the butt area and the whole torso seems like it's actually covered and encased in rubber. It's interesting the way that they've done that. The arms hinge out, no issues whatsoever there, although for my figure I've still got loose issues with the elbows. The elbow does bend, single and double bend in case you're curious, and you can rotate the hands. One thing I also wanted to mention just before, because I know I'm going to forget about this if I don't mention it now, is I've noticed on this figure there's a split that's starting to develop here. I don't know if 100% of it was just the case that the figure came out of the packaging like that, but if you shift the hand back and forth, you can kind of see that little line that's developed here. Again, it may have likely came out of the packaging looking like that, but it's a shame that I've got this split. If you look at both sides actually, this side doesn't have it, but I can almost kind of see where it's been attached together. I don't know if that's going to give me problems down the road. Something also I noticed too, if I'm just going to take the hand off, I know we're kind of taking a departure away from the articulation for a second, is that the joints are very small, and I don't feel like they're built the best of ways either. That looking at it, and when I'm moving the hand, and I've taken the hand out a couple of times already, kind of looks like this is going to start separating from itself. It hasn't done it and hasn't broken yet, but they're very thin looking fragile pegs. You're going to want to be careful with these. Knock on wood, I haven't had any issues with it yet. Unfortunately though, QMX didn't come included, or didn't include at least, extra pegs to go with the Nun. So if you break those ones, you're going to have to repair those ones, because those are the only ones that come included with the figure. Then we look at the figure's leg articulation. Despite for the fact that of course the dress is covering over top of it, you can still get a marginal splits happening for Valak. You move the legs forward and back, you're probably not going to be doing this much activity with displaying your figure. I don't know, maybe you might. It has a swivel on the top cut of the thigh, a double hinge on the knee. You kind of work and see how that's all working. And then you've also got quite a considerable ball joint, so you can get an ankle pivot back and forth. You can move the feet up and down, and in theory, you can rotate the feet all the way around. Again, I don't know why you would want to do that, but certainly for the sake of this review, it's just to simply show you guys how much articulation is at foot. That's a bad joke. But certainly when it comes to the figure's feet articulation, you get a fair bit happening here from Valak. That's not a bad thing at all. I find myself actually liking this Nun when it's all said and done. There has been many instances that we've gotten ourselves Valak immortalized in a 6-scale plastic. Prior to QMX doing their outing of a Nun, I think there was a third-party company that had done an unofficial, of course, version of the Nun, which wasn't as good of a figure. I was actually close to picking up that one until I found out later that QMX was releasing their own, and definitely wanted to go more official. I thought the head sculpt would look a little bit better. Getting this actually in hand, I find myself liking the figure more than I thought I would. Online, when of course I'm looking to pick up pieces for myself, if I'm shopping around, I like to look at first images. And whenever I did a Google search, there was either two things that I was usually seeing with the QMX release of Valak. Either I was getting photographers' tweaked photos, which of course has cool lighting done to it and certain angles to make the figure look better than usually what they are. Or I also saw other instances, which a lot of online sites seem to use, where it was just sort of the stock photo of what the figure looked like with the accessories all around it. And I didn't think it looked that good at all. I still jumped because I wanted to at least get a Nun to my collection, so I jumped and bit the bullet to buy this one. And getting it at home and opening it up and getting on display, I must say I'm pleased with the end result. The paint job on both the head sculpts, whatever head sculpt you decide to go with. In final looks, I've got the Screaming head sculpt, but I think I'm more leaning towards the neutral head sculpt myself. I think both paint jobs on both head sculpts is actually quite good. The vein work on the Screaming head sculpt seems to stand out a little bit more than the neutral head sculpt, but again, both head sculpts I think turned out really good. He comes, of course, with a whole bunch of different interchangeable hands. You want to be careful, of course, of the pegs that I mentioned near the end of this review. The pegs do seem like they're a little bit more fragile, and if you're not careful, you could potentially break it, and you won't have extras to pull from. Other than the hands and the two interchangeable head sculpts, you of course get the worn painting, the portrait done of Valak, and that's a nice touch as well. Probably going to be displaying the neutral head sculpt, holding the painting in hand. I just hope that the paint isn't going to come off those fingers and work their way to the surface of the painting. That would be a real bummer. Speaking of bummers, the only thing I could really negatively point out about this particular figure is the way that the veil is attached. I really think it could have been attached a little bit more securely. One little looping of thread is not nearly enough, if you ask me, to keep that veil in place. I get that you want the freedom to be able to move and manipulate it, and of course with the wireframe embedded into the surface of the material, you can pull that off. But it needed to be fixed a lot better than what it actually is. Not only does it flop around a lot when you are posing the figure, but I also worry that if you aren't careful, that's going to come off and break completely. Then you're going to have to always be putting that veil back on because it's going to be falling off too frequently. They should have definitely done a little bit better, I think, when it comes to attaching the veil to the head sculpt. Other than that, though, I'm pretty happy with how this one turned out. I was a little on the fence, but I'm glad still I decided to take that holy leap, if you will, to pick up the Nun and add it to my collection. Though I will not be displaying it likely with the Screaming head portrait. I don't know. Just for me, I kind of like the more neutral head sculpt. I do like at least that QMX gave you the option of giving you two alternate head sculpts, so there's a couple of different things, different ways to display the figure. Did you manage to pick up the Nun Valak for yourself? Let me know down below in the comments section what you guys think of it, or based on this review and this review alone. Also, if you guys want to go back and have a look at some of my other QMX figure reviews, or also, of course, some of the other things that QMX is putting out there right now, like the Q-Figs, you can check out my QMX playlist. It'll have everything on there. Also, if you're new to this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below, turn the bell notification on, and stay tuned, because there's going to be a whole lot of videos coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.